We'll talk more about supply and demand. These help us answer two questions about what happens when there's a change in the market. Two questions are, what direction does the change happen and how big is it? First question is easier in general. The second question requires a bit more calculations, but simple ideas nevertheless help us focus on where we want to look for more detail. So on the horizontal axis, we have Q, the quantity of the item that's traded. And then on the vertical axis, the y-axis, we have the price. The supply curve is the upward sloping line in yellow-brown. Demand is downward sloping, shown in blue. I've drawn them as straight lines, but they can be curved, and I'll often call them demand curve, the supply curve, to remind about that. They can have bumps and wiggles, I guess. The point where these two curves intersect is the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. If the price were higher than P star, then the quantity supplied would be greater than the quantity demanded, right? Just read off those different curves there. Now, this sometimes happens if some policy sets a price floor that is above the market price. QS, the quantity supplied, would be larger than QD, the quantity demanded. That means there are goods piling up, unsold. Businesses would want to put them on sale, send them to the discount rack. Maybe the policy prevents that. So the policy would prevent getting back to equilibrium. Governments do this for some farm products. They set a high price for certain goods, and then they have to figure out what to do with the extra. Sometimes they just dump it out. Sometimes they store it. For example, use the milk to make cheese, which stores for longer. Sometimes they pay farmers to not grow more. Obviously, there are winners and losers. The farmers get a higher price for what they're selling. They like that. Consumers have to pay a higher price for what they're eating, and they're usually unhappy about that. In the opposite case, there might be price ceilings. For some reason, prices are required to be lower than the equilibrium value. Therefore, the quantity demanded is going to be greater than the quantity supplied. That lower horizontal line, the price ceiling, hits the blue line for demand to the right of where it hits the brown line for supply, so there's going to be more demand than supply. People are going to want to buy more things, but they cannot get them all. Somebody's going to be disappointed. Concert tickets, for example, often have this sort of characteristic. There are complicated reasons that artists keep concert ticket prices lower, but the outcome is usually more people want to buy than there are seats available. Online resellers step in to move the price towards equilibrium, so the folks who want to see a popular act pay a higher price if they weren't fortunate enough to get the initial deal. Sometimes other premium products have similar issues. A vineyard maybe will offer a limited edition of wine at a rather low price. Not everybody can get that low price, and so bottles are going to be resold at a higher price. But now what happens when the supply or demand curve shifts? Recall they can shift for lots of different reasons, such as people getting more income or just a shift of taste. Maybe this is the market for olive oil, and there's another big study about the health benefits of a Mediterranean diet. So people want more olive oil. That's a shift of the demand curve outwards, so at every price, people want a higher quantity. So the old P star is now too low. Quantity demanded would be greater than the quantity supplied. Price would increase. That increase in price would raise the quantity supplied, so there'd be more available to meet the increased demand. I'll put a pin here. We'll come back later, but note the slope of the supply curve is important. In the picture, it's got a middling slope, but it could be very steep, almost vertical, or it could be very flat. Those different slopes would have different relative effects on the size of the price change or the quantity change. Now, what happens if the supply curve shifts? Suppose, again, talk about olives, but now there's a drought in the Mediterranean, where a lot of olives are grown, so harvests are lower. Any given price, there's less olive oil available. That's a shift of the supply curve inward. The old P star value would be too low again, there'd be greater demand than supply, and the price would have to rise. It's common in popular discussions to hear two different rationales for markets. One is that they just happen. Even if people want a different outcome, such as artists setting low concert ticket prices, other markets will tend to enter. There are other high-value crops, such as marijuana, where decades of government policy couldn't stop markets from working. But the other rationale is that markets are actually really good in various ways. I won't say they're good in every way, but markets are highly effective at certain things. I've mentioned in various examples that usually suppliers want a higher price, but consumers want a lower price. There will inevitably be tension in any market. But that can be productive tension. As consumers shop around looking for lower prices, that gives incentives for producers to be efficient. In an ideal market, the equilibrium price is actually the best choice that would be made by some all-knowing social planner, some benevolent AI that wanted to maximize the wealth of the whole society. A single price reduces the necessary information. However, since so much information about relative scarcity of the good and the inputs and how much consumers really want it, bundled up into just a single number, the price. That's really effective. Ideal markets are Pareto efficient, meaning the only way to make some group of people better off is to make somebody else worse off. Now, of course, actual real-world markets are not ideal. Why are actual real-world markets not ideal? One of the big reasons is initial endowments. Some people start poor. They don't have a lot of wealth. Maybe they're in a place where there are a lot of things working against them. Other people just get born lucky and have a lot of endowments. They're able to demand a lot of goods. Then there are issues with externalities where one person's choices create consequences for other people. For example, when I commute in a car, I release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which contributes to global climate change. It's a really big externality. Global climate change means that, for example, poor people growing coffee are going to have a tougher time to adapt. Now, just having rules for what happens when there are disputes, that's a kind of externality too. Then actual markets are often not ideal because companies have enormous power, whether through a monopoly where they're the only seller, or maybe there are a few large firms that have power in selling. Or there could be monopsony, a single buyer, or variations of pricing power if there are just a few buyers. And there are macroeconomic events such as a recession where suddenly a lot of people get worried about the future and don't buy as much. Markets are very common. They appear in many circumstances, and they're highly effective at certain things, even when not ideal. But linking back to our earlier discussion about how societies create commodities, they're doing that because better markets tend to bring a wide range of better things.